Hello, mentors. Welcome to Meeting 1 Appreciation on October 5th. So, this is the pair deck and also the teaching manual. We'll be meeting depending on your room on Wednesday from 2 to 3:50 at CAR ICEF 1310, Lathrop ALP 2200, and via NS2 1201. The agenda is the following. Kids will arrive at 2, except for via where kids will arrive at 2:15, but still make an effort to arrive at 2. Then we'll have an introduction, and then at 2:25, you'll be split into teams or tables, and you will be working with one or more mentors, along with, say, 4 to 6 students, and so on. So it's small groups. Here's the agenda after that. So we'll be doing interviews, when we will meet each other, ask lots of questions, including some small mathematical questions. And this activity is one of the most important throughout the quarter, because this is where you meet your students, you set the tone, many different things. And then at 3:05, after a small break, you'll play or do some puzzles called the list. So you'll be solving some problems where you have to find minima, so the least such that condition happens, or the minimum such that something happens, and you'll have to make sense of them. So we'll be reviewing this. We close at 3:40, and then you have 5 minutes just to say goodbye to your students, keep making some connections, and then at the end at 3:45, if you have time, please help us clean and organize the room. Now, B again will end a little later, so your LAs, your leaders, will tell you more about it before the meeting starts. So let's take a look and look at more things in this agenda. So here's some time management tips. So you expect the first part to be like 35 minutes or so, maximum 40 minutes, the interviews. And then second part 2, the list, also sort of 35 minutes or so. Here's some time management tips. First, talk about the time management with your commentors before the meeting, but also during the meeting. It's totally fine. You're still figuring things out. So it's fine to, say, hey, should we move on? Or maybe we should spend a little more time here. So it'll be a little rough in the sense that it's not very polished in the first meeting, but just make an effort to make decisions and, take your time. It's fine. Just talk it out. Be aware of downtime moments where nothing happens, and react fast to move on. And during the quarter, you'll be better and better to sense those moments where you're kind of, in the middle of something that never ends, and it's just not being productive. You're not teaching anything, or students maybe are discouraged. So it's good to identify it and move on. In part 2, there's 3 puzzles, but you don't need to do all of them. One is totally fine. Please do not show the teaching manual to students. So let's keep going. Here's some math goals and enrichment goals. I'll let you guys read about it after, in your time. But in this quarter, we also have not just math goals, but appreciation goals: empower, imagine, design, empathize. And this is part of, brings the curriculum a little closer to students, in the sense that they're not just doing math because, or just learning about math, but there's a sense of community, a sense of accomplishment, culture, so lots of interesting things. And we'll be talking more about it during coaching sessions. Here's some extra tips that you can read. And this meeting is all about make it come alive, which will be very important part of our coaching session, which means making the task come alive, having the mindset that you as a mentor are a bridge between the students and the task. So you're bridging it and you're making it more interesting, more impactful. So all types of storytelling, adding a story, humor, maybe changing the pace, something curious. So many different things to make it more exciting, and also asking questions so that you can connect to student interests. Using music, polling students, all sorts of things. So a little bit, go more in depth about interviews, the first activity. So as we say, 35 minutes, and it breaks into 3 parts. 5 minutes just to break the ice, little introduction. You don't know your mentors much. You don't know your students at all. Then 10 minutes to open up. And finally, 20 minutes for the interviews, where your goal is to get all students involved and exchange stories and start getting a little sense of your the mathematical skills. So here and then you'll ask some math questions, maybe a math problem involving, say, fractions, percentages, ratios, things like that, simple things. And then you'll start knowing about the math that your students, the attitudes of your students. So I'll let you read all about it here. But let's say some tips here in the interviews that make it, more engaging. First, maybe you can bring a microphone. Actually, a toy is fine to make the activity more engaging, and you can bring it to coaching on Monday just to practice. You can bring also a recorder. You don't need to record, but it's just to make it more, pretend play. That is really, the interview is really happening. Tip 2, you can invite your students to ask you questions about your major, the classes you're taking, etc., etc. Model this, so ask these questions to your fellow mentors. Make sure to explain any technical college terms, of course. And tip 3, since part 2 includes puzzles about video games, painting, and connecting houses, maybe you can start asking some questions that may be useful in the future, in part 2, like, do you play board games? Do you like arts? How many apartments are near where you live? Do you go outside? Etc. The last tip is that it's not just about you learning about your students, or the other way around, but it's also mentors learning about mentors. So you're also knowing your mentors, and that's very important. And students learning about students. Of course, they're set, the same school, but they can still learn like new things. So try to lean towards a more horizontal relations. This is a key feature of mentoring. You're not a teacher, you're a mentor. So in some sense, you're at the same level. Let's talk about part 2, the list. So this is after the break, and here the math begins, so to speak. And so this will be 3 different puzzles, and other videos may talk more in depth about it. But the idea is that you'll be starting asking questions, sample questions, and let me show you which ones. What is the least number of people that you wish attended your birthday, or what is the least time you take to prepare some food, the least height, such that if we drop an egg from that height, it will break for sure. So you're starting all these questions that have the word minimum or least, and then it starts creating a trend and also a relation with your students, because it gets kind of personal. I mean, these questions are not the most personal, but you're getting some information about what your students like or don't like from these questions. After that, you jump to the puzzles, and you'll have 3 options. You can pre-select the puzzle to start with. You can poll students to choose a single puzzle, and everybody works on that. Or you can do kind of mini groups, and each mini group of 2 or 3 students will freely pick which puzzle to start. So we'll let you choose on that. And these are the puzzles. The first one involves dragons, beasts, blue griffin, white griffin, and it's like a video game in which you want to accomplish some missions that are quite difficult. For example, get at least 1 dragon egg, and you have to, be 100% sure that you're gonna get the mission, and you want to minimize on that. So you grab 5 eggs. Is it 100% sure that you will succeed? Here the answer would be no, because you could have just bad luck and don't get a dragon egg out of this distribution of beasts. Of course, you have just 8 dragon eggs, and the rest are non-dragon, and so on. So this is a fun puzzle, and it involves your own mission. So it's also a very important part of the puzzle, in which students may create their own mission. Here, you have to help students a lot, because maybe they don't just, create from scratch. So you can just push or, give some advice there. But students should be creating their own missions. The second puzzle is called painting, and you have some tracks to paint. So it will involve finding the surface area. So how many, unit squares do I need to cover this? And then it involves some minimization, finding the least or the maximum or the least. Here involves both maximum and minimum number of trucks that you can paint using 100 cans. Or you also, what's the least, you can design your own, 3D object, and then answer these questions again. So yeah, the basic question is, what's the least number of cans that you would use to paint just 1 truck? And each paint can covers 4.3 square units. This is the second puzzle. And it's not just about the puzzle, but the math. But part 3 is also you have to design your object. So there you can know more about your students' interests, which things they like, which objects they like. Make it simple. So final puzzles called Disconnected, and it's about making sense of graphs from the math point of view and connected components, edges, these points. But also, culturally speaking, is making sense of where do students live. Do they live with many people? Do they have neighbors? Do they like their neighbors or not? So, it's fine that, you don't reveal much information at the beginning, but then hopefully you reveal information about, your own preference from neighbors. You open up, and then kids may open up and say, I like this, I don't like that. So here's a mural of Santa Ana, of course, to start a conversation. And then the math is about noticing and wonder this graph or this diagram, which is a mathematical graph. And then the math question is, what's the smallest number of roads that we need to add to connect all houses, either directly or indirectly, right? Because right now it's disconnected. You cannot move from this house to this house. So what's the minimum of connections that make this whole community connected? It has a follow-up in which kids will generalize and say, okay, if I change the settings, what happens? What can I conclude? What can I abstract or generalize? Final question is very interesting. What if you had a map with 20 connected zones and 43 isolated houses that you cannot really draw, or you could draw, but it would take so much time? How do you make sense of that and solve this problem without even drawing? So it's very interesting. So that's the meeting. At the end of the teaching manual, we also include the student workbook that lets you see what's this meeting gonna be about. So this student workbook doesn't have anything about part 1, the interviews, because there's no really curriculum there or math questions that have some sequence. It starts from part 2, the list, and it has these puzzles in order. Remember, you don't have to do all 3 puzzles. One is totally fine. You can do take home for families, so that students, when they get home, maybe they solve it with another student or with their parents or brother, etc. So that's the meeting right there. If you have questions, please Slack us and we'll be ready to answer. This Pear Deck is due on Monday, October 3rd by noon. And hopefully you can do it sooner so that we can look at your amazing answers and all the inputs that you make. So that's pretty much about it. Enjoy the meeting.